Well, I think the act of writing itself is meditative. I feel like, especially in my groups or when I'm writing alone, there's a place I go to that for me is, it's not, I'm not here for a little while. I'm in another place. Oftentimes I will say, and other people that write in my groups will say, I'll read this, but I have no idea what I just wrote. So there's a place where you go that's not, yeah, it's like another level of consciousness, I guess. And I really love that. I love being able to slip into that. As a really little kid, my parents read to me. I really identified with storytelling, and I I think I started thinking about it seriously, like in grade school. Like, how do you become a storyteller? Reading was always an escape for me. So, I remember being in grade school and not wanting to go out to recess to play flag football with the boys because they were just ruthless and just teased me a lot. I'd run the wrong way with the ball and stuff. And I had been keeping journals and writing really bad poetry, a lot of it plagiarized from Hallmark posters, which sometimes were quotes by people like Emerson or Shakespeare. Of course, I didn't have the context for that. But I still have it, a little silver poetry book that I wrote really, bad, you know, sophomore poetry in. And I had a writing teacher, an English teacher, my sophomore year in high school, who told me that I should be a writer. She actually said, you have talent, you should pursue it, you should be a writer. It's the first time someone said that to me. I don't actually remember her name, but she was very straightforward, very clear, and it was a real moment for me. I thought, wow, maybe I could do this. Thank you to you, whatever your name was. I remember your crazy hair. I'm gonna look her up. See if I can find her. I was really interested in the relationship between writing as a therapeutic art or healing art. So I was really interested in literature and psychology, creative writing and counseling. Those two were very connected for me, partially because in my own experience as a young person going through my mother's illness, I wrote my way through that. I kept myself sane. I think I kept myself alive writing through that. So journaling at that point in my life and poetry was a way to make sense of something that felt really chaotic and full of turmoil and really frightening to me. I used the written word as a way to find my way through that. I finally went to college when I was 20 or 21, and I was at a community college, Diablo Valley College, Pleasant Hill, California. I had to take a freshman writing course. There were two different teachers I took. One was more of a creative writing teacher. It still fulfilled the requirement, where we wrote autobiographical stuff. And I wrote about the experience I was having. So it was the first time I actually had someone read about it and respond to it. And I remember his name was Gus Gustafson. And Gus was really cool, and he got it. He really understood, like, whoa, he's writing about something big. So I took a kind of a traditional freshman academic writing class where we did lit review and wrote essays. And that instructor was Dan Dantzler. Also, the guys with the two names. He was, he's someone I actually talked to about being a writer, and he also felt that I had talent as a writer, which is why he wrote me the letter of recommendation. Then I went to Hampshire College. It's a 4-year university, and I studied literature and psychology, and I really looked at who the writers were and what their experience had been and why they wrote about what they wrote about. And then I had to decide on one or the other to focus on for my senior year. I had to decide on literature or psychology because you have to focus your senior project at that school at Hampshire College in one discipline. The way that I worked it out was that's where I met Pat Schneider, who led these writing workshops and really gave me the idea to do it myself. And so I formed a small gay men's writing group. I was really interested in how people influenced each other as writers and supported each other as writers. So the piece still ended up, my research still ended up being about how people help each other, how writing is still therapeutic or, helps us to make sense of experiences in some ways. But I focused on the writing itself and the writing practice. I'm very sneaky. I took a couple years off and I was waiting tables and I was really unhappy, and I was writing and trying to figure out how I could make writing a profession, but I didn't have any I didn't really have any support for that. I didn't have any models for that. And so I decided I was going to be a therapist. And I applied to the Master's in Social Work program at State, which is a pretty well-respected, San Francisco State, pretty well-respected program. At the same time, my good friend Melissa from college said, I saw this flyer for this program at USF. And it was a flyer for a master's program in creative writing. And the applications were due about the same time, and so I was working on them simultaneously. And I remember the Master's in Social Work, and I remember thinking, this is work. And then I got to the application for USF, and it was like, I don't even know, it was so familiar to me. It felt so right, and it was so effortless. And I thought, well, this feels so much better, this is what I want to do. My very first job I ever got paid to write was for this little online magazine called Night Vibe. It's San Francisco, local, things to do, clubs and bars and things to do at night. I pitched this series of interviews to interview DJs, and I wanted to interview my favorite DJ, David Harness. You're still my favorite DJ, David. So I asked him, because I used to go to this club where he spun on Tuesday nights, and so I said, would you, do this interview with me? He said, sure. And I said, well, I'd like to take you out to lunch. So of course I had my little tape recorders back in the day. It was so loud in there, you couldn't fucking hear anything. And, I got paid $50 for the piece, and lunch cost me $49. So I got paid $1 for the very first thing I ever wrote. I've done freelance writing, so I've gotten paid to write, which was a really big deal for me. Free verse poetry in literary magazines. I've had poems published online recently. Early on, when Match.com had a magazine, I wrote for them online, adopting kids if you're a gay couple, and dating if you're, intergenerational, what not to do on the second date. I have helped other people with their writing by being a tutor at the Writing Center at the university. I teach at the university and read people's writing and give them feedback. I lead 2 workshops in my home every week. Critique feedback groups, manuscript feedback. Offered feedback to people online on their writing. Gay men's workshops, grief workshops, week-long writing retreats where we basically have a writing workshop every day for a week. France, Italy, Mexico, and Hawaii. And I've also led workshops with women who are survivors of breast cancer. I started the workshops really so that I could have a place to write with other people and that I could be fed by their writing. I knew I was good at it, and I knew that I was helping other people. Some of the stuff that gets written in my workshops gets published. Later they work on it and it shows up, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember that piece. I think the real shift for me was when I decided to do it twice a week. I really wanted to grow the workshops. Partially I wanted to grow them because I wanted to be able to make a living and live in this city. And the workshops became a place for me to not only grow and identify as a writer, but to be inspired by other people's writing. It helped me to be a better teacher at the university too, because I was always looking for a way for them to cross over. I write partially because I love the way words sound. There's certain words I have, like twilight is one of my favorite words, reciprocity. People will grab the dictionary. I have a dictionary over here in my living room. People will grab that sometimes when we're talking about words at the break to understand the evolution of a word or the correct pronunciation of a word. Just being able to talk with people about words and how you put words together, and voice and intention and character development and setting, sensory details, all that stuff that I love about writing. Well, so when I was in college, I met a woman named Pat Schneider who had writing workshops in her home. And I was I was doing research on writing groups. So I went to her, I called her actually, and said, I hear you do these writing groups and I'm really interested to interview you. And she said, well, why don't you come to one of my workshops first and participate so you can see what I do. So I said, very generous. So I showed up, and she had this beautiful old farmhouse, and she had a tiny living room stacked with, bookshelves, stacked with books, floor to ceiling. And she had a circle of chairs with a poem on them. Each had a poem on them. And in the kitchen, she had tea and brownies and some other snacks. And so I got myself a brownie and a cup of tea, and I sat down and I thought, well, I want to do this the rest of my life. She always had the brownies. I learned years later that she made them from a mix. And later when I moved to the Bay Area, I went to a workshop here with a woman who had studied with her. And she also had brownies. I learned later that she froze hers every week. So I had this idea in my head that everyone who did these workshops made homemade brownies every day for the workshops, which is not true at all. So I started making them because I thought it was part of this ritual, this kind of ancestry. And people became really addicted to them. I tend to make them really fudgy. So they're based on my mom's recipe, but I use melted chocolate instead of cocoa, which makes something more, makes chocolate desserts more moist. One time I lived in a little apartment and I had a efficiency kitchen, so I just had this little toaster oven that I baked them in. And I flicked it to broil once by accident instead of bake. And so I burnt the whole top of them and I pulled it out and it was like, raw batter with this burnt top. And so I just scooped it out and put it in the compost and went across the street. I lived across the street from a grocery store and I went across the street and got some cookies. So I put them out on the table and people came in one by one and they were like, where are the brownies? And I was like, I burnt them, what are these? And I was like, well, they're cookies, they're M&M cookies. And they were like, well, where are the brownies? And I was like, well, they're in the compost. And so one person flipped the lid on the compost. I'm like, you're not going to get them out of the compost. But it was this joke that people come for the brownies but stay for the writing workshop. But I also realized that the consistency, and I was talking about this earlier with you, that the consistency of coming and knowing what to expect. Seeing the chairs in a circle, seeing the poems on the chairs, seeing the brownies on the table. That consistency creates a sense of safety and an expectation that something here is going to be the same every week, and a ritual as well, like making the brownies is ritual. If I'm not reading consistently, I do feel sometimes like I forget what it is I love about writing. To spend time reading work that has been revised, that is polished, to remind myself oh yeah, this is what it's about. This is what you get to if you keep working on it. I think being discouraged is kind of built into being a writer. There's so many people writing and so much out there. I've had to learn to dedicate a certain amount of time every month to my own writing process. 2 Saturdays a month where I don't plan anything. One evening every week that I have 3 or 4 hours. If I don't get that time, I feel edgy or kind of resentful. I'm cranky and I'm super critical. I've noticed if I'm reading student essays, it's like, you better take a break. Go have a walk. Toni Morrison and James Baldwin are sort of tied as my favorite authors. I really like Baldwin's fiction, but I think I love his nonfiction more. One thing he always did is he wrote about love and anger at the same time, which, people tend to really separate. He just wrote about emotions in a really interesting way. Toni Morrison always has this, she always has a little bit of magical realism or the spiritual world. What Morrison does beautifully is uses metaphor and uses, kind of blends the world of the dream world and the spiritual world with the actual concrete world. And I love that. I love when dead people are main characters. Also love Steve McCauley, who's a very different writer. His stuff is humorous, but really heartfelt. He's really cynical and kind of that East Coast Boston cynicism that I just love. Jeffrey Eugenides, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He wrote Middlesex and The Virgin Suicides. Of course, Steinbeck, was my first kind of love of literature. I just adored his writing. I love poets like Marge Piercy and people that I'm forgetting. Ellen Bass is a writer I really love. That was not the one I was trying to think of earlier. I was trying to think of Mary Oliver. Richard Blanco, who's also a beautiful prose writer. He wrote a memoir piece called The Prince of Los Cucuyos, and it's just a beautiful story. Aaron Smith, his stuff is really edgy. It's really fun. In our family, if something is so delicious that you can't stop eating it, we call it evil. There's really no religious connotation here. But we use evil as an adjective with subtext. It's so damn good it has power over you. It's one of the highest compliments we can give a cook or a baker. My sister often says this to me right after taking her first mouthful of my chocolate cake. "Oh my God," she'll say, closing her eyes and savoring that first bite. "You're evil." My father was a great baker, and cheesecakes were his forte. But for me, one peanut butter cheesecake recipe was the most evil of all. I'm crazy about peanut butter as it is, and cheesecake is my favorite dessert. So when he combined the two and topped it with a chocolate sour cream, he really hooked me. It's been over 25 years since I first tasted this cheesecake, but even today, as I write this, I clearly remember anticipating my next slice. One morning I awakened and had a slice right after breakfast. The following morning I simply had a slice for breakfast, with a strong cup of coffee, of course. This is admittedly over the top. I mean, I have to draw the line somewhere, don't I? Nutritionally speaking, it's not my proudest moment, but it's at the top of my list of most extremely pleasurable food memories, and there's nothing evil about that. When I leave the city and complain about it and say, it's really expensive and it's been a really hard place to live and it's changed so much. And sometimes when I'm away, people remind me of that. They're like, "Oh, you live in San Francisco. I love San Francisco. It's so beautiful. It's such a great place. The food, the people, it's so liberal, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. It is a good place to live. I bitch about it all the time, but it's actually a great place to live." And so I feel that way about work too. It's like, yeah, I get frustrated, or I have sometimes times it's easier than others to do what I do, but I wouldn't trade it for something else. I mean, obviously I haven't. So, if I haven't by now it's too late. I'm stuck. But I mean, it's not true, actually. I could go do something else. I used to wait tables. I could go back and wait tables. I think about it sometimes and just go, oh God, no way, no way. Chicago is a dance floor, the L rushing toward the platform with a rickety, 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 rackety racket, train cars streaming in like notes, screeching to a stop, and then charging out of the station toward the skyline. Chicago is a dance floor, the skyline ragged with rooftops, skyscrapers on a flat surface, angled red and black, like fingers on a trumpet or a clarinet, screaming lights against the night sky, an alto sax. Chicago is a dance floor. Michigan Avenue is framed by Art Deco towers, their faces gleaming with neon like lipstick on wallflowers, standing back, gaining attention because of their quiet elegance and smooth faces. Streets downtown are named after honorees, the father of house music, Mr. Frankie Knuckles, still matching funky beats at 55, immortalized by a brown and white street sign. It's in the rhythm of the boots on hard pavement, in the snap, crackle, pop of candy corn corner stores, in the clomp, clomp, chomp, chomp, melt in your mouth divine of Frango mints from Marshall Fields. Chicago is a dance floor, faces of every color and an open, friendly vibe, black gay men with platinum hair and full-length gray leather coats voguing you to one side, or spinning on the sidewalk, curled in a ball, breaking b-ball and freaking getting funky. It's 3 a.m. on a Monday night, and the place is alive. Cars cautiously sliding across railroad tracks like a microbrew on a clean, wet bar, or baking hot in July like a deep dish pizza stacked with mushrooms, cheese, tomatoes, spinach, too hot to eat, too hot not to. Spinning, sliding, stomping, smiling, sweating, slurping, suffering, sampling, surviving, sashaying. Still hoppin', still boppin', still beautiful and hip and happenin', like the funky disco that never closes on the weekends, that's been open for years and years and years and years, timeless, fabulous, free.